And welcome back to the Weekend Journal here on News Talk 580 WTCM. I'm Jack O'Malley. And each Saturday morning at 10, we come your way talking about Michigan news. Every once in a while, national news, kind of slides in on us. But for the most part, it is Lansing news, Capital news, Michigan news, to keep you, the Michigan voter and resident, informed. That's the whole idea. So that's what we're going to do here today with a guest I've been looking forward to having on because I've read her stuff for a lot of years and she does a great job. Beth Leblanc is a writer with the Detroit News and she covers Lansing, and she joins us this morning. Beth, good morning. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Oh my gosh, I appreciate you coming on board. So how, you cover Lansing. Is politics something you've always been intrigued about and wanted to follow?
Not necessarily. I started in this because I wanted to work for the Detroit News. I knew that early on.
Okay.
And they had an opening in their politics bureau, and they graciously let me take up that role. And it's been a learning curve, but I've really enjoyed it. There's never a dull moment in Lansing, so that's a good thing in my book, and I think for most journalists.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, now I would say sometimes things are dull, but usually there's something lurking just around the corner that's going to be kind of exciting. Now, I remember watching, the press row up there when I was on the floor. You guys sometimes, kibitzing back and forth, but generally speaking, you always had your nose in that computer, your laptop. So you were always on it, right?
Yeah. We they keep us pretty busy around here, so we do try to keep busy the whole time, and usually if there is a dull moment, it's because you're not looking hard enough. So we definitely. But it's also, I feel like being on the House floor, even though the majority of the time you're working during those very long sessions, you also get to know a lot of the lawmakers while you're down there, and you kind of chat with them, and sometimes they'll give you tips on what to look into, and sometimes they won't. But it's also a good spot, too, that if you're trying to find a lawmaker for a story, you can usually chase them down on the House floor and get some good answers that way, too.
Sure. So you've got articles in the Detroit News, all the time. I want to hit up on one that I think was your most recent. I may be off by a day or two, but I thought, well, let's start with this because it's really interesting. And that is former University of Michigan President Santa Ono, now in Florida. And it sounds like when he got down to Florida, he had a few things to say, not necessarily in a direct smack, but it was a kind of subtle. One of the lines he said, "It became clear to me through experience, not theory, that something had gone wrong, that real reform was necessary." Your thoughts? You covered that. What do you think's going on there?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize the context of the interview that he was going into. So former U of M President Santa Ono, all but had the job at the University of Florida prior to this interview, but there were some last-minute concerns expressed by folks who were close to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis about whether he was, quote-unquote woke, or whether his DEI policies at the University of Michigan were the right path for the University of Florida. And some of University of Florida's board members are appointees of DeSantis. And so he was going into an interview with folks who had concerns about some of the DEI policies up at University of Michigan, about the way he handled some of the pro-Palestine protests at the University of Michigan. So we saw Santa Ono really take an about face on a lot of these issues, saying that he felt the DEI program had led to some divisions on campus. He said he talked about his handling of the pro-Palestine protests and what he sees as anti-Semitism on campus. So he definitely stated his opinions in very strong terms during that interview. But I think it's also good to remember who he was going in front of to get the job, which is a lot of DeSantis appointees. And in the wake of some concerns raised about everything that had gone on at U of M over the past couple of years.
Well, and that's where I guess from being in my position looking in, I remember when Santa Ono came on board, it was like, the second coming. Everybody was like, this is the greatest guy. He's the Babe Ruth of college presidents. And then as he got there, I don't know what I've read, who knows? He tends to be a little bit more right of center than average, and it appears that the University of Michigan regents tend to be a little bit left of center. And so I think that from my standpoint, now get your thoughts, is that just became a kind of a turbulent little relationship, and it was time for him to move on.
Yeah, that I would say that's probably a pretty accurate take on the situation. The one thing I will say though is that some of these issues in recent months, especially as it pertains to like pro-Palestine protesters on Michigan campuses, they really divided within typical groups, right? Within your right and left groups,
Mm-hmm.
how to handle this, who's in the right, how far you can go with free speech on campus before you stop it. I would say for the most part that's accurate, but I also think there were some strange bedfellows on some of these issues
Okay.
over the past several months at U of M, and so it was sort of a hard one to suss out where everybody stood on issues at the end of the day. But yeah, I mean, and the other thing to keep in mind too is that Michigan's university boards in recent years have had some pretty public spats with their presidents. Whether you're talking about Michigan State University or the University of Michigan, there is a lot of politics at play within the university boards. These are elected officials within Michigan, and there is a lot of politics that happens behind the scenes and sometimes comes out in pretty public disagreements with their president.
Yeah, and no situation is ever as simple as it appears just from the outside. There's always something else involved. So I understand what you're saying. I want to move to another story that I mentioned that you had done a couple of weeks ago, but I think I'm curious if you could update us at all, and then we'll get to just Lansing stuff. State office tasked with evaluating certain child fatalities failed to screen 150 children's deaths over an 18-month span. What's going on there?
Yeah, this is the latest in some pretty critical audits of the Department of Health and Human Services, and in particular their Child Protective Services section. That is so the Office of Auditor General within Michigan, they routinely do audits of different programs within the state, and sometimes they're more financial looking, sometimes it's in practice, like how things are working practically at a department. And this one was looking into basically the coordination between the different parts of those units of government responsible for child welfare, and making sure that if there was a death of a child that kind of met the benchmarks for review, that it was reviewed. And what they found was that not all the reviews were done when those children passed away. And so they kind of flagged it. And the Department of Health and Human Services over the years, there has been tremendous scrutiny on the child welfare system.
Sure.
Over the past decade, really over a couple of different administrations, both Democrat and Republican, and so they've been trying to recoup that program and to make it work better, because it is absolutely a very critical program within the state. And it seems like they can't get away from these audits that keep finding kind of some issues within those programs. Now, some of this is the one thing you have to keep in mind with the Office of Auditor General is sometimes it's not so much like a very critical mistake was made, but that procedure wasn't followed, right? And there's a reason that procedure is in place, because they don't want a very critical mistake to be made, but it doesn't automatically mean that there was no review done of those deaths. It just sometimes means that there wasn't, a secondary review or a tertiary review of those deaths, and that is what was missing. So it's still a very serious finding. The Auditor General, noted it as much, but there are a lot of technicalities to those Auditor General reports that are difficult to suss out sometimes.
Yeah, and 150 children's deaths in an 18-month period seems like an awful lot, no matter what. I mean, 150
Yeah.
kids dying in the states. If you would say oversight, that's that seems like a failure. But we'll follow along. That's a sad story when kids are involved. And you're right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That department's been a little shaky for a few years now. All right. Well, let's. And by the way, folks, we're chatting with Beth LeBlanc, reporter for the Detroit News. Read her stuff all the time. It's always good. Well, let's just talk about the House. Matt Hall seems to be, I say this in a nice way, not in a derogatory way. He's become like the Johnny Carson of the House. I mean, he's got a monologue every week where he holds a press conference, and it's must-see viewing. The Senate seems to be pretty quiet. The House Democrats don't do much. The governor has disappeared. Matt's the show, isn't he?
Yeah, he's definitely he's taken up a lot of space in Lansing in terms of his comments to the press. He usually has a weekly press conference that ranges from an hour to an hour and a half long with media. And also is pretty open whenever they have questions about different things. And, I think it is an approach that we haven't seen for a while from different House speakers. I can go back a couple of sessions ago where, for example, former House Speaker Tom Leonard would have weekly meetings with media as well on the House floor. But for the past several sessions, we haven't really seen that. And so that's coming back, and it's coming while there's divided government and while the Senate Democratic majority, by comparison, has been relatively quiet on a lot of these issues. It's just, I think it would be accurate to say it's just not the Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brink's style to really hold a press conference like that. Sometimes to our chagrin, because sometimes it's hard to get some straight answers out of Senate Democrats. It's not necessarily like they need an hour-long press conference, but to get some clear answers would be helpful. And I think what you see with Hall's press conferences is that it wears on Senate Democrats after a while. You can kind of see them getting, frankly, annoyed with some of what's said during those press conferences. That doesn't necessarily bode well for the budget negotiations that are coming up here. So I think we'll see what kind of impact it has at the end of the day.
Well, there's another. I was going to ask another question, but let's go to the budget. That has been a different process too, as it's always been. Well, I shouldn't say always, but in recent times, we got to get it done by July 1st. And for whatever reasons, I think one of them is a good idea. Hey, we've got some real issues here. We got a budget that's bloated to 81 billion, maybe even 83 billion. Let's take a minute and look and see where we can cut. And if I, as an outsider watching in, I see the House is saying, let's take our time and get this right, where the Senate kind of just went along and did their thing, and then the estimating review comes in and they're behind. In some ways, the Republicans are doing it right this time, but it is creating a little bit of a process because everybody's worried about it. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I think it's important to remember why they put that July 1st deadline in, one of which is that schools, so most of government starts their fiscal year October 1st. So they need to know their budget by September 30th, October 1st at the latest to make sure that they can pay for things in the coming year. Schools, their calendar runs from July 1st through June 30th. So if a budget can get passed by July 1st, it's a boon for schools across the state, because then they don't have to kind of guess at what their funding levels are going to be come October 1st or into the future. So that's why they have that in place. But yeah, I mean, House Speaker Hall has argued that, that they need more time because this budget has increased just progressively over the past several years. And it's increased in part because the state was flush with cash during the pandemic, which may sound odd, but for some reason our tax revenues were up, and the state was getting a lot of federal aid through different pandemic relief programs. So they've had the money to kind of bloat that budget over the years, but now they're facing, declining revenue and the possibility that it could only get worse going forward. And so they're having to take some serious looks at how to change that. So the House Republicans say they need more time. Senate passed their budget. And in defense of the Senate, I mean, this is how things are done usually, right? Like
Yep.
that both chambers will pass budgets, and then they come to the table and say, okay, here's where your priorities are, here's where ours are, and then you come to budget at the end of the day. And I think the Senate is getting frustrated with the fact that the House hasn't passed one yet, because they're like, we can't even come to the table until you put something on the table. So there are clear reasons why the House is seeking to wait and to get this right. There are reasons on the Senate side that they're used to, having that conversation at a negotiating table and not necessarily finalized in a chamber budget.
Gotcha. And you're right. You can't discuss or compromise till you see what the other side has. Folks, we're chatting with Beth LeBlanc, the Detroit News. All right, this story, if my memory serves me correctly, you're the one who started all the trouble, and that's with the Lansing office space. You FOIA'd records, and they said, oh, we can't give them to you for security reasons. Am I correct on that one?
Yeah. So so obviously since the pandemic, there has been a lot of questions about when workers are going to return to downtown Lansing offices, or even offices in Detroit or in Grand Rapids. Lansing in particular has been pretty antsy about seeing that happen, because the downtown relies on state worker traffic a lot of times, from restaurants to shops to just to living locations within the city as well. So we've been kind of curious just to get an idea of, all right, let's wrap our arms around it. How many people are actually working from home still? What are the work situations? And so we've been seeking to find that information. And it's been very, very difficult. First we went department by department asking them, is there a minimum number of days that workers have to be in office? And very few of them would give us a number. And whether that's because the number doesn't exist or because they just didn't want to give it to us, I'm still not clear. So then we requested information on how many people are using key cards to swipe into buildings on 5 random days last year, because we figured that would give us the most accurate representation of how many people were working in state buildings.
Sure.
And they said they could not give us that because it was a security issue. And so we're kind of working through that process on our end and what we do next to try and get that documentation. But I think, it caused a lot of upset within Lansing and among lawmakers who, frankly, have been seeking the same information for about 5 years from the state agencies and trying to get to the bottom of where workers are at and where they're working. And, it may be, I know the state has defended the workers repeatedly, saying, they're more efficient sometimes working from home or given that freedom of working from home and in office. But it's difficult to take that argument if they won't even show the numbers of where these folks are working.
Yeah.
And the other idea is, if the downtown Lansing buildings aren't being used, if they're basically worker deserts where nobody is in there, then should the state be holding on to these buildings any longer?
Sure.
Or should they give it to other folks?
Yeah, you got to heat them. You got to keep the lights on. You got to keep them secure. And if nobody's in there, why bother?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's a question that a lot of people are asking is, can the state of Michigan downsize its footprint and save taxpayer money if folks aren't coming into the office anyway?
Sure. All right, Beth, our time is growing a little short, so just curious, you've covered, different House sessions. This one has been a little bit interesting because it's divided government, not just House to Senate or House, to the governor. It's on the floor. We've got, pretty divided caucuses down there, too. Thoughts? Do you have a particular kind of closing thought on your coverage so far of the first half of this term?
Well, I think, I think it would be accurate to say that House Speaker Matt Hall has kind of run the agenda so far. for Lansing. And I think, though, where the rubber hits the road is going to be this budget process, and to see what kind of hurdles they have to clear for this, whether everybody can get along at the end of the day and pass a budget, or if we're looking at least a temporary shutdown come October 1st. I think that's going to be the big question that develops over the summer.
Very good. Well, we'll be keeping an eye on it, and somehow I think so will you. Correct?
That's correct.
All right. Beth LeBlanc, thanks for being with us today. If it's all right, we're going to invite you back sometime, if that's all right.
I love that. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. Beth LeBlanc, Detroit News. Read all about it right there. She's got stories for you. This is the Weekend Journal on News Talk 580 WTCM. We'll be back in just a couple.